Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Malatsi. I'm the DA's National Spokesperson. We'd also like to welcome those that are joining us from all our social media platforms. Today, the DA has an important announcement to make. This is the culmination of years of fighting back on this particular issue. And to do that, we are joined by the DA's Shadow Minister for Public Service and Administration, Leon Schreiber.
Thank you very much, Soli, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining us both physically and online today. The Democratic Alliance can today announce that for the first time in our country's democratic history, the South African Cabinet has adopted a policy of the DA as official government policy in an area that is fundamental to our country's survival and future. The National Framework towards the Professionalisation of the Public Sector, which was approved by Cabinet on the 19th of October 2022, has wholesale adopted the DA's approach to abolish cadre deployment and replace it with merit-based appointments throughout the public sector. As the highest executive decision-making body in the country, Cabinet's adoption of the framework means that President Cyril Ramaphosa's government has accepted the DA's merit-based appointment policy as the only way we can begin to fix our country's crippled and corrupt public sector. Following its adoption by Cabinet, the framework now becomes the highest policy directive governing the public administration in the country, which means that all other legislative and policy proposals need to align and be amended in order to enforce the ban on cadre deployment. The DA will now fight tooth and nail to ensure that this happens in every sphere and in every institution of government. In an unambiguous reference to the tireless work done by the DA to sensitize and expose to the public the way in which ANC cadre deployment laid the foundation for corruption and state capture, the framework admits that, quote, recruitment and selection practices based on deployment have gained notoriety which has spawned cynicism, end quote. The policy acknowledges that the DA's work to expose this form of systemic ANC corruption created a, quote, surging negative public perception about employment practices in the public service. In another clear reference to the DA's ongoing court case to declare cadre deployment corruption unconstitutional and unlawful, the framework makes the extraordinary admission that, quote, some even question the constitutionality of cadre deployment related to the principle of equality, and they may have a point if deployment practices are to be looked at from the perspective of Section 1973 of the Constitution, which states that no employee of the public service may be favoured or prejudiced only because that person supports a particular political party or cause. This is the exact constitutional clause upon which the DA has built a part of our legal case. This spectacular admission by the ANC government, endorsed by the ANC cabinet, confirms the DA's case that ANC cadre deployment is unconstitutional. As a direct consequence of the DA's ceaseless efforts to generate public pressure against the ANC's cadre deployment corruption, the framework stipulates that, quote, deployment practices ought to be ditched in favour of a merit-based recruitment and selection system which is key to building a capable, ethical and developmental state. In emphasising a point that the DA has made throughout our groundbreaking campaign against cadre deployment, the framework notes that, quote, other countries have a position similar to that of DG or HOD, which is termed a permanent secretary, who is always politically non-partisan. In a merit-based system of recruitment and selection, well-qualified candidates with capability to perform a public function would still make it anyway without any political shore-up. That could have come out of the DA's pen. And now I want to actually quote directly from the policy directive, keeping in mind that this is now the official policy of the government of South Africa, straight out of the DA manifesto. And I quote on page 63 of the new framework for professionalizing the public sector. Recommendation is made that deployment practices are to be ditched in favor of a merit-based recruitment and selection system which is regarded as key in building a capable, ethical and developmental state, and is also about contributing towards changing a surging negative public perception about employment practices in the public sector. In a merit-based system of recruitment and selection, well-qualified candidates with capability would make it without any need for political shore-up. The policy then explicitly directs the following government institutions to implement this directive to ditch cadre deployment: the Public Service Commission, the Department for Public Service and Administration, the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, the Department of Public Enterprises, and all other departments with authority over Schedule 3 entities, as well as national and provincial legislatures. It is very clear that the DA has won the policy battle against cadre deployment. It is clear that we've won the battle at the level of superior ideas and policy. And now we are going to be redoubling our efforts in the legal battle and opening a whole new front to force the implementation of what is now official government policy to abolish cadre deployment. We are not naive about the challenge that still lies ahead, as we ensure from the opposition benches for now that this DA policy is implemented across government. But with DA policy now being government policy, it is clear that the dam wall is leaking. To make sure that the wall breaks and that cadre deployment collapses completely, the DA will do two additional things. Number one, on the legal front, we will urgently write to President Cyril Ramaphosa requesting him to rescind his earlier decision to oppose the DA's court application to abolish cadre deployment. The reality is that his own cabinet has now endorsed the DA's legal position that cadre deployment must be, quote, ditched. It is therefore hypocritical and completely untenable for Ramaphosa and his cabinet to continue opposing our court case. The fact is that ditching cadre deployment is now official government policy taken straight out of the DA manifesto. This means that our court case to uproot this practice now becomes, in fact, an effort to implement the government's newest policy. It is a legal absurdity for the president to oppose his own government's policy. But the president's hypocrisy on the issue of cadre deployment has backed him into a corner politically. He now faces a stark choice. He either chooses to properly implement this DA policy in the interests of the country. If this is his choice, then he will drop his opposition to our court case. Alternatively, the president may continue to defend cadre deployment in court in violation of his own government's new policy. If this is his choice, we will know that he has chosen the corruption of his party over the needs of our country. We will know that he is incapable of implementing the policy solutions South Africa needs. The second thing we will be doing from here on out is on the implementation side in a new front that is now opened up in this battle. As a result of our policy victory, the DA will be writing to the Speaker of the National Assembly requesting her to urgently refer the DA's End Cadre Deployment Bill right back to the Portfolio Committee on Public Service and Administration. The ANC in this committee had earlier rejected the DA's bill. But crucially, this was before ditching cadre deployment became official government policy. It is in the interest of the public that the Portfolio Committee reconsiders this bill in the context of DA policy now being government policy. We will also be conducting a comprehensive review of all public sector laws in order to introduce legal amendments that outlaw cadre deployment throughout the state. The days of the ANC simply rejecting these proposals on cadre deployment are over, because they will now be compelled by their very own policy framework to implement DA proposals against cadre deployment. The formal adoption of the DA's policy against cadre deployment by Cabinet constitutes the single most significant public policy breakthrough for South Africa since 1994. It is without precedent in our democratic history for the ANC national government to ditch its long-held defense of cadre deployment in favor of the wholesale adoption of DA policy in an area of such fundamental significance. This breakthrough signifies that while other political parties are caught up in the politics of empty spectacle, the DA is seriously engaged with and winning the battle of ideas. This moment marks a potential turning point for our country, as it demonstrates that even the ANC now accepts that the DA's policies are ready to govern. The question, however, is whether the ANC can ever be trusted to properly implement its newly adopted DA policy. I have my doubts. After all, if the ANC wants DA policy to be properly implemented, then they should surely make way for the DA to become the government. Nevertheless, between now and 2024, the DA will apply the same vigor, energy and relentlessness that caused us to win the policy battle to finishing off cadre deployment in court and to force the government to implement its new policy to ditch cadre deployment. All of this we will do to lay the foundation ahead of the 2024 election, when the DA will carry the policy solutions we need to fix South Africa into a new national government. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leon. Colleagues, will start taking questions from the media who have made the effort to come to the House. Can I have an indication of hands of those that are interested in asking questions? Sure, we'll start with you.
Okay, so how will you go about implementing these policies despite not being in government?
Okay, let's go to the second one also.
My question is, what are the next steps for the court case, and what does this mean for cadre deployment?
Okay, and I think given that we have two, I'll also take the one question from online, and then Leon will just respond to all of them at once. So the question is, this is a government document. What does it mean, and how does it pertain to the ANC? Sure.
Thanks very much for those questions, colleagues. Let me start with the first one. This is exactly the corner in which the President now finds himself. It is very clear that officials in government have realized that it is untenable for them to continue defending ANC cadre deployment. That is the outcome of the government process that has resulted in the adoption of this new framework policy. But on the other hand, we know from various pronouncements that the ANC as a party is hell-bent on continuing with cadre deployment. And that is in fact why it is opposing the DA's court case. Now, the President has to choose. Does he go with the official policy of this government, even though it is straight from the DA manifesto, or does he stick with prioritizing his party over the needs of the country? By the way, the needs of the country, which his own government officials tell him, will be best served by ditching cadre deployment. So the very first thing that has to happen is that the President must withdraw his opposition to our court case. It is inappropriate for him to not only use taxpayer resources to defend the ANC, but it is also inappropriate for him to oppose his own government's new policy. I do just want to say, I mean, it's quite remarkable that we're even having this discussion. The DA has worked on this for 25 years to come to this moment where, even though the government has clearly tried to do it quietly, the reality is that the DA has won this policy battle. And it is, without a doubt, the single most important contribution that we can make at this particular point in our history. Because whatever happens with government policy going into the future, none of it matters if there's not a state with the ability to implement that policy. That is the point we've reached. Our state does not have the ability to implement, even when there are good policy proposals on the table. And that is why this victory is of enormous importance for the people of South Africa. So yes, there's the ANC, yes, there's the dynamics in politics and in parliament, but ultimately this is an enormous victory for the people, because if this is properly implemented, it is the people who will benefit. And that leads into the first question about implementation as far as the DA is concerned. Yes, we are currently in opposition, but it is from opposition that we forced the government's hand on this. We have made policy from opposition. And this is the second time in a short period, within a month, that the DA has had the majority of public support on our side, to the extent that the ANC and government have been forced to capitulate. It was the same story with the ministerial handbook, where it was very clear that the majority of South Africans backed the DA's position on scrapping those additional benefits. And now, clearly, after years of work and a very intense few years of ramping up the pressure on cadre deployment, it is again clear that the majority of South Africans are siding with the DA on this issue. The government makes it clear in its own document that it is capitulating because of public pressure and because of our court case. Those are the only reasons. This is not a gesture of goodwill. It is a gesture of capitulation by an ANC that can only muster a minority of support on particular issues in South Africa. The majority stands with the DA. And I think that that is a very important implication out of this particular issue as well. And it is that ability to muster majority support across society for our issues that we will use in Parliament, that we will use wherever we go in every forum to force the government to implement the commitment it has made. Because as you heard from the framework document, this is not something that's hanging in the air. There are specific institutions that have been given the task to implement this. Particular government departments, the Public Service Commission. Those are the ones that we will be approaching with legislative amendments to force them to implement what is now government policy. And then finally, on the issue of our court case, the implication should be that the President withdraws Cabinet's opposition to our court challenge. And frankly, that the ANC should consider doing the same. Because even the ANC, which has a right, of course, to defend its policies, no matter how misguided, are opposing the policies of its own government now. And so you have a profound contradiction that is legally untenable, first of all, for the President. And the President needs to withdraw his opposition. He needs to stop spending taxpayer money on legal counsel, on trying to challenge a legal case, which is now trying to enforce the policy of his own government. That will be our focus going into the hearing, which will take place on the 23rd and 24th of January next year. And we hope by that time that the President will have been forced, just like he was forced to capitulate on the ministerial handbook, just like the DA has forced his hand on cadre deployment, will also be forced to see that it is impossible for him to continue opposing this particular court case. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leon, and thanks to all the colleagues from the media and everyone who joined to watch this broadcast on our social media platforms. It is very clear that the DA has used its parliamentary space and also outside of Parliament to be resilient, and this has led to this victory. This is the culmination of a lot of people that have been involved, and most recently with Leon driving this issue. So we'll keep doing what we need to do in Parliament to reverse this, and this is a victory for everyone who has supported the DA's move on this issue. Thank you very much.